Hey there, Amy. Welcome back. This is our next episode, episode 8. I think this is going to be episode 8 of the podcast. I actually got some really good, interesting feedback from our last one on younger versus older, which was good. And the one before that on the trends. Admittedly, people, I don't think are thrilled about the whole AI thing, but can't deny the realities of what's coming or what is. And so, I would say that's good. At least we're talking about things that actually make sense for the market that we're talking to. So kudos for us. Yay. Small clap, small clap. How are you today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you. I'm doing excellent. How about yourself?
Good. A little under the weather, but overall still sort of stoked from the wedding from a couple of weeks ago, admittedly, but also for my win of the week, which also my good of the week, which also I think put me into a good space. So I'll start that. I was at a conference on Sunday called the Business Mindset Israel Conference, whatever that means exactly. I don't know. That's the name of the group that produced the conference. And I would say that it was a really good, like 1-day event, like hard hitting for about, it wasn't even a whole day. It was a half day kind of a thing, 5 or 6 hours maybe. And it proved one of the trends that I talked about, which is the in-person piece, which had a lot of people there, very excited, very, into it kind of group of people, looking to network, looking to connect, a lot of good energy, a lot of good sessions. It had its minuses like every other conference does in terms of just logistics and structure, whatever. But overall, it was good to be in front of people. It was good to be around people. And usually I'm not a fan of saying that out loud. And so in this case, it was very much that, the opportunity to connect with new people, to meet new people, to put myself in an uncomfortable space like that, which, as I said to one person at the conference, I really don't like large groups like that, where it's large group networking. I could stand in front of 1,000 people and tell them my life story. But if I have to network in front of like 1,000 people like that, it wasn't 1,000, but it's really not my comfort zone. But it was really good. I got some really interesting leads and opportunities out of it. Made some really good contacts and connections out of it as well. And it just sort of felt like it bodes well for the future. So that's my win. It's not in our space necessarily, although there were nonprofit people there. But, I got 5 or 6 meetings out of it right off the top, which was great. And so, for business, that's good, obviously. But in terms of just a general vibe, I had a really good vibe, and I'm glad I was there.
That's awesome to hear. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know my LinkedIn wall was plastered with people that were there and posting videos and pictures from it. So it sort of felt like I was there, even though I was not. But it looked like a great conference.
Yeah, it definitely had that too. Those are just I posted a lot about it, which again I normally don't do. A couple of videos that I did, which I normally wouldn't do, to sort of promote it and push people to attend. I was a facilitator for a coaching session there, which was basically turned into a live coaching session. It was like live coaching, like 5 or 6 businesses on the spot, which was interesting and different. And yes, people were very excited, as you say. Yes, your algorithm sort of played towards it, but there was a lot of positivity around it, and people were very excited to participate and be there. So yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome. Happy to hear that. I'm excited for my good of the week, because my person is someone that I've never actually until recently had learned from. The backstory to this is that I find fundraising endlessly fascinating, as I hope is clear.
Yeah.
And if you could drill down into really what I find so fascinating about it, it is understanding why people give and what we as fundraisers can do more of to inspire people to give more. And there's a lot of people in the space that I've learned from. A lot of people that I've either taken classes from or listened to podcasts on or read their books or signed up courses. Like, there's an endless amount of teachers out there. And there is a woman out there who is in very much the same circle as a lot of the teachers, the mentors that I've sort of collected over the years. But I've never actually learned from this person. I've never read a book of hers. I've never taken a course of hers. I've never listened to her on a podcast until recently, until this past week. I listened to a woman named Jen Shang. It's a name that I've heard a lot about, but I've never learned from her directly until I heard her on a podcast. She, I think, has one of the more interesting professional titles that I've ever seen before. She is the world's only philanthropic psychologist. So she really studies those behavioral economics of it all, why people give, which is why I was surprised myself in that this is the first time that I've really consumed any content by her. But the podcast that I heard her on, she was just going through some of the relatively simple ways that people, the 5 levels, as she called it, that people can thank their donors. I'm starting from that very, very bottom baseline of like an acknowledgement of receipt, that tax deductible letter, and then working up from there, the 4 other higher levels of thanking donors and showing gratitude. And she really, really just blew me away. She's runs what's called the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. I think it's out of the UK, and she's now officially square on my radar. I'm excited to just see what else she has put out there and dive in, because it was really, really awesome. So Professor Jen Sheng, I highly recommend anything you can get your hands on.
What podcast was she on?
She was on a podcast called, I think it's called Build for Good. There's a fundraising consultant based out of Canada, Mike. His last name starts with a D. It's a funky last name that I've never.
Dirksen.
That's it.
Something like that, right?
That's it.
I know of him. Yeah.
So I found his podcast. I literally have about, 25 or 30 episodes downloaded on my phone. And every time I'm just like searching for something, I'll hit play on a random one. I find it to be really, really good. I find his interviews to be really, really strong. So he is on my list for good of the week at some point as well, just because he's putting out such great content. But for this, I'm going to have to hand it to his guest on the latest podcast I listened to, which was recorded not recently. It was recorded 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like this. But again, I just really found it fascinating.
Was there like a standout item that she said that like that really stuck, or is just overall because she sits right in your wheelhouse in terms of your interest?
I always am very impressed by people that are able to give 5 levels of something, right? Like to me, there's just like a mush of information, a pile of information in my brain that like all sits there. And for people to take those piles of information and organize them and catalog them and sort of give them a hierarchy, I'm trying to think if there was anything that she said that I was like, oh my God, I've never heard that before. But broken down, the way that she was able to break it down, it just seems really accessible and took something that feels like it's hard to implement, like, oh, thank your donors better. And we don't know what that means. And she was able to break it down in a really strategic way that I think anyone could walk away from. And right after that podcast, be a better fundraiser, because you're going to thank Ben. There was a takeaway there that no matter where you were on that scale of 1 to 5, that allowed you to improve. And that organization of thought was something that I'm legitimately jealous of, because lots of people are good at it, but Jen is one of them. She just organized her thoughts around it in a super, super concise and accessible way.
Awesome. Okay. Those are good. So conference and the podcast.
There you go.
And at some point, Mike Dirksen as a good of the week and maybe a guest. So I listened to a couple of things he did. He had something called the Donor Flywheel, which was super interesting a while back, which just sort of appreciated how you think through how you are connecting and reconnecting, and just how they come into the funnel and how they work through to create a better consistency with the donors. He had a piece, I think, on direct mail, I think at some point also, which perhaps was interesting. I think it was him. So I definitely appreciate that. Okay, good. Now for the rest of the show. Okay. So this week's episode, we're going to dive inside your mind, Raimy, and we're going to talk about what I would like to think about as words that win. We talk a lot about fundraising. We talk about maybe the art or the science, the approach to fundraising. We'll talk about organizations, winner organizations that need to improve in X and Y and Z area. And really a key component to all that they do is how they communicate on a consistent basis and how they message on a consistent basis to their audiences of supporters, donors, audiences of followers, whatever they may be, future people that are going to support them, however that is, and how they get that messaging out. And so I wanted to dive into this space with you here. I don't know anyone else who does it better than you. So, and to really unpack the brain of the words that win, if you're game for that exercise with me today, you have to say,
I am.
No one can hear you if you don't talk.
I was just thinking in my head that this is the first podcast that we've done where I think I've done zero prep for, which isn't to say that I've done zero prep. I feel like I've been prepping for this conversation my entire life. But since we decided to do this, I have no notes in front of me. I am like really flying by the seat of my pants here.
Okay, good. So here we go. So I'll start. I'll just ask the questions. You answer. We'll see how that goes. And if it's bad, we'll just re-record it after with you having prepared a little bit more than zero. Okay. So let's start with this. Why does the way that the organizations communicate matter so much?
It matters because I think of philanthropy. I think of a donation very similar to a sale. Very similar to a sale in that when you buy something, you get something in return. You get a product or service in return for what you buy. I don't view fundraising as any different. And before I continue with the analogy, I'll say that if you give money for something and you are not satisfied, it doesn't meet the expectations of what you thought you were going to get when you made that purchase, you're not likely to purchase it again. So I think that if we view fundraising through that sort of prism, then you're going to say, okay, the sale, when you make that point of transaction sale and you actually give someone the opportunity to give to your organization, the ask has to be good, or else they're not going to give away their hard-earned money and get nothing in return. And if you don't give them something in return, then they will indeed have received nothing in return and they're not likely to do it again. So I think it's important because we want people to give. We want people to feel good. And if people feel good when they give, then they're going to give again. To me, it's not much more complicated than that.
Is there a component of it that, and I get that you designed that answer into the specific space of fundraising, let's say for the asks, is there a component of it that's simply just they have to tell their story? Like I would use this analogy, like way to say about it. If an organization does work in the forest and nobody hears about it, did they do anything? Right. And so what's the value in that space of just simply communicating well the impact that they have related to fundraising, but independent of an ask, let's say?
Well, I would sort of flip it because I would kind of throw the question back at you as if a donor gives to an organization and that impact is never reported back to them, then does the donor know he did anything good, right? Like, I think that it works. It sort of depends on where your camera is pointed. If you're pointed at the organization, then there's one story there. And if you're pointing the camera at the donor himself or herself, then the story is focused there.
Okay. So you've seen a lot of organizations tell their stories. So what's the biggest mistake they're making? From just at this point in your career, it's thousands of organizations, right? So what's this, like, I would call it the single greatest, but let's take their biggest mistake that either from a mental standpoint of how they're thinking about it to an actual active mode. What are the mistakes that they're making in the stories that they're telling about their organization?
So now I see why you're asking that question, because the answer is that they're making it all about themselves. They're not pointing the camera at the donor. They're pointing the camera at themselves, and they're making the story of the organization the focus of the story. I think the analogy continues that if you were going to sell shoes, Nike doesn't build its reputation on what a historic company they were and where they started from and how many shoes they've sold over the last year. Like, that's not what they're doing to convince you to buy their shoe. What they're convincing you to do to buy their shoe is saying that you, Benny, if you lace up those Jordans right now, you're going to be able to jump and dunk, right? You're going to be able to fly. That's what they're making the story of the shoe, the story about the consumer. And it's something that I think organizations have a real tendency to do, because in other aspects, and certainly in grant writing, that's often what grants are asking for. They're asking for their history. They're asking for a lot of the facts and figures and statistics that the organization is built upon. But when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to individual fundraising, when it comes to the non-grant writing, the non-grant side of fundraising, the story is about the donor and the act of giving and why a donor should open up his or her heart and wallet and give to your organization. The story has to be much more about the donor than it is about your organization.
Right. So when it's about the organization, it's marketing, right? When it's or positioning, and when it's about the donor, it's about fundraising per se, right? I've learned that from you at least, and I that's maybe a brutal sort of or a blunt way of saying it that people don't like to hear. But I'm just trying to think through like differentiating between the different stories that you're telling or the different methods you're telling the story and the mistakes that you're making.
Yeah. So just a good place that to think about it from is where I start every fundraising message that I write, which often when I receive a first draft from the client does a first draft and say, will you review this for me? Very often it's going to start from a place of the organization's history or a place of strength. It's going to start from a place of strength and say, this is who we are. This is why you should give to us because we are awesome and doing amazing things. I approach it from a very different standpoint. My starting point is always going to be a position I won't say of weakness or of vulnerability, but I want to give donors that problem to solve. We have to start by saying what the problem is out there in the world that the organization exists to solve. And the way to think about that for organizations is what does the world look like for service recipients before they meet your organization? That's pretty much the easiest way to think about this. What does the world look like? So if you're a homeless shelter, you can think about what it means for someone who is looking for a warm coat or a bed to sleep in or a warm meal. If you're an education facility or an educational institution, you can think about it as what opportunities does this child need in order to flourish, to get individualized attention and any extra enrichment or resources that he or she needs to really soar. You can think about it from no matter what organization, no matter what sort of nonprofit you run, you can always think about it as what does the world look like for service recipients before they meet your organization, and lay that out there and say, this is the problem in the world, that there are people out there that exist in this reality. And stop there and just like let that breathe and see how that feels before you pivot to the solution, which is not, and we can get to the solution in a second, but the solution is not our organization serves X number of people every single day. The solution is going to become when you, Mr. and Mrs. Donor, donate, you're going to solve the problem and you're going to essentially put a coat on this person who doesn't have a home right now. You're going to give this child an education. You are going to solve the problem by donating to the organization.
Okay. I want to keep it inside the space of differentiating a little bit. It's like in terms of marketing versus the fundraising ask just for a second here. If you're putting that on a website, right? Not the donation page, just the about page, right? So the about page of an organization is going to be the problem that they're solving and the solution that they provide without the call to action effectively. And then maybe I'm wrong. And then on the donation page, it's basically the problem, the solution, and the call to action, like the donation, the ask that follows it. How do you, if you're writing for an organization writ large for them, so you're telling their story and you're also writing their fundraising communications, those are related, but they're not the same. So break that out for me a little bit more, because I want to see the difference between those two, if I can, if there is.
I think the first question you have to answer is what's the point of whatever piece of communication you're writing, right? So I know having dealt with a large number of schools, this is especially challenging for schools, this strategy. Why? Because schools are constantly fighting for enrollment. And while they're fundraising, they're also trying to recruit. How are we supposed to position ourselves as vulnerable? How are we supposed to lay out a problem in the world if we at the same time are saying, you should trust us to send your children here so that we can educate them? And so I think that for those types of organizations, you can't turn your entire website into a fundraising mechanism, fundraising arm. That would be, I would love to see that in some way, shape, or form, but the website's purpose is not primarily to fundraise. The website's purpose in that aspect is generally going to be for recruitment, enrollment, to boost those numbers. So I think you have to separate the stories at that point. You have to. I think there are other organizations that their primary focus is on fundraising. There's plenty of organizations around that. And I think if you are an organization that can focus primarily on fundraising, then yeah, you should turn your entire website into a fundraising machine by constantly laying out what the problem is and constantly giving the visitor to your website a call to action to donate. For the school side, you have to choose which fundraising vehicles you're going to sit in to do it. But for other organizations, I think that they can dedicate as much space as humanly possible to this exercise.
Got it. Okay, so let's dive into more specifically. What are the ingredients from your perspective, the key ingredients, the main ingredients that make compelling nonprofit copy?
So I hit on two of them already, but let me spell them out. The first is that we're going to structure every single message with a problem, solution, call to action. That is the arc for every single fundraising message. And within every fundraising message, you can weave in and out of the problem, solution, call to action. This is what the world looks like, but it doesn't have to look like this. It can look better, but we always want to give donors that problem to solve. And the second ingredient, which I hit on a little bit, is the solution has to be directly tied to the donor. We want to make the story of this fundraising campaign or this fundraising message. We want to make the story just as much about the donor as it is about the organization, and even to a certain extent, as much as it is about the service recipients themselves. This is a story about how you, the donor, fit in what you can do to affect change. So I tend to use the word you a lot when I write. Like, one of the pieces of feedback that clients get when they see my writing for the first time, see my messaging that I propose, is like, every sentence has a you in it. And they sort of say that as a detriment. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, that's great. That means I did a good job, right? Like, I want you to be in every single sentence and every single term of a fundraising message, because this is that's how you sell shoes, right? You are going to jump higher if you buy our shoes. You are going to save someone's life if you donate to our organization. So I always want to use that word you. And one of the sort of, like, I guess, tricks I play in my head is I almost, when I sit down to write and I have like this blank sheet of paper, I almost think of myself, I picture actors who have to like get into character before the camera rolls, right? And what I essentially do is I'm going to like think about all of the credit that you, the listeners now, the fundraising professionals, nonprofit professionals, I'm going to think about all of the credit that you deserve to run your organization. Think about all of the credit that your board should get for spending so much time and effort into making sure that the organization is run responsibly. All the time that your staff puts in. I'm going to take all of the credit that you deserve, the people that make this machine run, and I'm going to take all of it away from you. I'm going to give it to donors. I'm going to give donors 100% of the credit for the outcomes that take place within the walls of your organization. And that is the way that you tie donors as directly as possible to the people that they're helping. When you donate, you are going to save someone's life. I have a little bit of a pet peeve. I was keeping a folder for a while of all of the fundraising pieces of communication that I received as a donor that sort of diluted the message by saying, join us or help us save someone's life. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was like, it's such a silly mistake to make, to dilute the message by inserting the organization into the story. Help us save someone's life, as opposed to donate to save someone's life, because it's free to change those words, right? Like, you lose nothing. You lose nothing by taking yourself, the organization, out of the story and just keeping it as directly focused from the donor to the service recipient. It's got to be about you, and it's got to be about the impact that you can have when you donate.
Well, I imagine that you get a lot of pushback on that, right? So that when you said feedback before, that has you in every sentence, I imagine for a lot of organizations, not just feedback, is like a lot of discomfort, or there's a lot of maybe frustration in taking all the credit away from them and putting it on the space of the donor. One, and two, I imagine also that for some of them, they don't buy it, right? They feel like they're not comfortable doing that because, well, maybe it's not true, or they don't think it's true. They don't feel like it's true if they go about that. So how do you don't persuade them or convince them, get them over to see it from your perspective and your side of it, without simply just saying, well, I've done this for 1,000 different organizations and it works, which, I mean, proof of concept, but it is like, Appreciate for me for a minute here the feeling or the emotional side, the discomfort of the leader and the nonprofit that you're writing for.
Yeah, I get that it's a mindset shift. And I like those meetings and those clients the best because that's, I think, just changing your mindset around it is like, is half the battle. When you see it click, when I work with someone and it clicks for them, they're like, oh, this is why we're doing it. It's like, now I have that foundation to build and to do more, and to write in this way or to communicate in this way. I think the hardest thing for organizations to buy into is they're operating on the assumption that people give to us because we're awesome. We have to constantly tell people why we are worthy, why we are trustworthy enough to receive your donation. And the way that we demonstrate trust is by talking about all our past accomplishments. How are they going to know my organization is awesome if I don't tell them that my organization is awesome? And my response to them is I generally flip it. The way I tried to do with you earlier in this conversation is, how are your donors going to know they're awesome if you don't tell them that they're awesome, right? We have to just kind of get out of this preconceived notion that we are somehow, I want to use, this is going to sound harsher than I mean it, but we're operating from a place of we are entitled to your donation, so please give it to us. And I don't mean that to sound so mean, but I think that if you could peel back the layers, that's sort of what fundraisers think. It's like, I deserve this, so just give it to me. Not I as an individual, but my organization deserves this, so just give it to us. And I would much rather flip it and make this story about the donor, where fundraisers go to donors and say, "You are so awesome. You are an unbelievable person. Look at what you can do if you donate. You are going to totally transform someone's life."
But there is a balance, right? Somewhere in there, at some point, you are touting the accomplishments and the impact of the work that your people or you are doing in your organization. So how do you strike that balance? Is it like certain communications are more organizational impact focused and other ones are more donor-centric focused? Like, lay that out for me as a way for a leader to appreciate that.
So the way that I like to bake it in there into the ask, look, there's endless amounts of communications that organization can send to donors and tell them about the accomplishments. But let's focus on the ask right now. So how are you going to do that within the ask? And you can do that within the ask simply by describing in as great detail as you want what the solution is going to be. So we talked about before about painting this picture of what reality looks like for service recipients before they enter your organization. Now paint a picture of what it looks like for service recipients after they come through your doors. And if we're going to keep talking about people that need a warm meal, then we can say, you focus on the problem and you're going to say, imagine the loneliness and the being scared, not just scared, but you're hungry and you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. And then all of a sudden, the three words that I love the most in my fundraising are because of you. And I would say something like, because of you, this person is going to walk through the doors and be served a hot meal and be surrounded with people who love him and care for him and are going to make sure that he has everything he needs to spend a warm night. So you can describe what that solution looks like, and you can go into a tremendous amount of detail about all of the wonderful things that your organization is going to do for your service recipients. You're just going to give donors the credit for it. You're going to say, this is what you do when you donate. This isn't what we do when you donate. This is what you do when you donate. So you get to add in all of the amazing language that you want about what the solutions to the problems are, what the outcomes are. You're just going to tell that story in future tense, and you're going to give donors the credit for it. And donors get it. They understand that not everyone can provide this service. It takes a special organization to provide it, but you don't need to hit them over the head with it. You can make them feel like the hero.
I was gonna lean into that last point you just said before you said it. I was thinking the way you're describing it, it's almost on some level feels like you're stripping out the organization specificity, naming of the organization or whatever it is for the sake of the problem and the solution so that people can appreciate what that is. And then you're putting it back in saying that we're the ones who do that work because of your donations, meaning this is a problem and a solution. If our organization didn't exist, this would still be the same problem. This would be the same solution, right? It happens to be that we're the ones doing the work in the space of this problem and this solution. Does that make sense?
It does. Thus, the way that I think about it is from an organizational perspective. You're not asking someone to give to your organization. You're asking someone to give through your organization to the person that they're helping.
Right. That's an important, I wouldn't say that's not like just a tweak. That's a shift, right?
Huge shift.
So appreciating that you're a facilitator of this work, you do it maybe better than everybody else, but you're a facilitator of this solution getting done in the world. And that's the impact, is you as the facilitator of it and not you as the person who deserves. I mean, you said it, they deserve the donation, but it's not because of me that I deserve the donation. It's because we solve the problem better than everybody else does, let's say. And that's why you should support us.
Yeah, I think the number one reason why someone is going to give to your organization, the number one reason is because they were asked. Okay, so let's start with that. Most often, you're not dealing with someone who has their checkbook out, because no one has their checkbook out, has their virtual wallet out, and is sitting there thinking, I'm going to give away money. Now I just have to decide who to give it to, and then starts scrolling through different organizations and kind of picking and choosing which one they want to give to. That doesn't, it happens occasionally. I'm sure it does, where you have someone, especially if they are interested in a specific impact area and then just want to give to an organization that is most effective within that impact area. But the overwhelming majority of time, we're dealing with people that you just need to communicate your message to and sit in front of them if you're making a face-to-face ask and say, look at the impact that you can have when you give. If you're able to do just that, you're going to win much more often than not.
Make sure that everyone listening gets that. So it's the framing in that space of putting it into the problem solution impact that they have through you. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I like to concentrate my message as much as possible on the impact that a donor can have when he or she donates.
Irrespective of who you are as the person asking for the donation, on some level?
To a certain extent, I mean, now we're getting into a little bit of the details of how this communication is happening. Are we one-to-one? Are we one-to-many? Like, I think that these sort of details matter. But the overall structure of a message, if you're not able, if you're one-to-one and someone asks you follow-up questions and you're going to answer those follow-up questions, you have to and you should. And it's the right thing to do. I'm thinking about this, I guess, from a place of both mass communication and these one-to-one asks to paint that picture for a donor, just to say it one more time, see if it comes out any better this time, where this is what the world looks like. There are people out there in the world who are experiencing this cold reality. You can give them this brand new reality where they have everything they need to flourish. The way to do that is to donate.
Have you found when organizations struggle on this, are they struggling on the problem side, on the solution side? Where do they struggle in telling this story? In other words, I know they're going to struggle in flipping it over and it being about the donor. Fine, I get for sure. And I've seen that working with you on a lot of campaigns. But in your experience, do they more often struggle in painting the picture of the problem or in establishing the solution?
I think the problem, no, they're pretty good about the solution. The solution is complicated for a little bit other reasons, but on this particular point, they struggle more with the problem, often because they're not used to telling their story in this way. They're not used to starting off with that vulnerability. And I don't really view it as a vulnerability because this doesn't say anything about the organization. It's only saying about the people that the organization serves and that there's more of them. But they struggle to articulate that message, and in a way that doesn't, in no way, shape, or form can hurt their reputation. So just as another example for schools, something I deal with a lot of private schools, and I like to include some sort of line that says something to the extent of many families can't shoulder the cost of full tuition, something like that, or something like tuition, even if paid in full, wouldn't cover the cost of expenses, which is true for the private schools that we're dealing with. Their operating budgets far out exceed if you sum of all of the tuition that they collect. Even though that demonstrates a problem, they're often reluctant to use it, which is fine. I'm not married to it. I think there's other ways to get the point across. It's not an absolute, but the point is that they hit upon that speed bump of, well, if I say something like that, it shows vulnerability of our back office, right? Like that.
Vulnerability or weakness?
We can say weakness. That's
No, because
probably a bit.
vulnerability is one thing. I feel like when they say weakness, when what I'm hearing and what I've heard from organizations, they don't want to appear
weak
or at risk or in danger in any way, right?
And I think and to drive the point home for me, right? Like the thing that that took me a little bit of time to understand from their perspective is they're thinking to themselves, okay, what if we have a prospective parent, someone who doesn't send their kid to our school, and this parent is looking for the best opportunity for their kid, and that parent is going to look at this fundraising message and say, oh my goodness, this school can't make budget, right? Their balance, it doesn't balance. Their financial sheet doesn't balance. Like, why would I send my kid here? So it's something that I've learned. It was not easy for me, but I've learned to accept and honor and respect. Like, I get that. There's no reason why a fundraising message should ever position an organization as weak. With that said, giving donors a problem to solve for that, however we're going to decide to articulate that problem, to me is an absolute must. It's a non-negotiable. There has to be a problem to solve, or else why are we asking donors to give?
Okay, good. I appreciate that. That's really important. And you getting in there in terms of the us versus you is like an important shift, and the mindset shift to sort of facilitating. I used to talk about fundraising as facilitating dollars to impact, and it didn't matter how the dollars got in. If I was just a facilitator for it, it didn't matter if it was me directly or whatever. My board didn't agree with me, but my role as a fundraiser, I felt very much, was facilitating movement of money from one place to another for the sake of impact. And it didn't have to be me necessarily doing it, as long as the goals were achieved and the dollars were raised, right? I really felt that was true, because it allowed me to bring in partners in the organization to play a role in fundraising. And it didn't feel like I had to worry that it was always going to accrue to my balance sheet every single dollar, and that I was a facilitator. And the board thought it was ridiculous to think of it that way, which is, partially perhaps why I left and was not there any longer. But I felt more, I would say this, is the collaborative sense on the team was that we were all facilitating towards the same goal, and it wasn't competition amongst the different fundraisers. I really do believe that that's true. It wasn't like I came up with it as a way to make myself feel better about myself, but I definitely hear what you're saying. Okay, next question here.
Wait, can I interject for 1 second? Because
yes.
As you were talking, I just had like the craziest flashback memory of you and me that I think our listeners will appreciate, and maybe you'll appreciate if you don't remember this. I just had this like crazy memory of, I think, what might have been the very first conversation that you and I ever had together. You and I, we first spoke over the phone when you joined Cosmatch. And we had sort of like an introductory phone call. We were dating ourselves there because it was little bit. I mean, Zoom wasn't around. It wasn't that long.
I did all my work on Zoom at the company, so it was definitely Zoom. But anyway,
there was definitely, but I remember, because I was pacing, I think probably right here, and I mentioned something to you about this you versus we. Right, I have an exercise that I like to go through with clients where I take an old piece of fundraising that they've written, and we circle all the times they use the word you and all the times we use the word we, and I see which one outweighs the other, and it's always.
By the way, a good exercise. If you're listening, that's a good exercise for you to see how you're doing as a writer for your organization. Just take a look at the you versus the we. Okay, anyway, go on. Yeah.
It's a fun exercise to do. And I mentioned something about that to you, and you had a very funny reaction to me. Do you remember this at all?
Vaguely, but once you start, I'm sure I'll go down the path.
Okay. Yeah. So you started laughing because you thought it was funny because it was the exact
opposite of what I did in my rabbinic career, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it. Finish it. But yes, I'll explain in a
So
second. Yes.
so as a rabbi, when you're giving your sermon or giving the I guess you probably can say it better than me, but when you're giving the community feedback on things that they should be doing, shouldn't be doing, you liked to use the word we as opposed
Yeah.
to you because you want to include yourself as a leader. You are part of that collective.
Yes. You don't want to point the finger at everybody in the pews and say it's your fault and you're terrible and you're horrible and this is why it's not working and this is the problem. It's you, right? You like that's the Costanza line, right? It's not you, it's me,
Right.
right? So in this space, it was exactly the same. In the rabbin, it was like it's always we can do better. The community can do better. We have to increase our giving, our focus on faith or whatever it was. And if you took yourself out and said it was you, what do you mean? Like you're accusing the community of X and Y and Z. That this doesn't work. You have to go to the language of I or we. I, and when you're talking about something that you specifically have a problem with, that you're working on yourself, and we as a collective, because you really don't want to be, in accusation mode. In that space, I do remember.
But I remember thinking to myself at the time, like either this guy and I are going to get along very well, or he's going to disagree with everything I'm about to say.
No, but I would say that, and by extension, I learned in that space, in that conversation, and subsequently having watched you do the work with clients and having to get that mind shifted around the text to appreciate where the angle that you're coming from and the notion that if you don't draw the donor into the space, you're basically deflecting them out by saying, we're awesome, we're so good, we don't need you. And I do now see that where, I'm working with an organization, whatever that it may be, and I'm reading their writing and it sounds like, you don't need me because you guys are you got it solved. Like you solved it and it's great and you don't need me to support you. And I get that. So I always felt like, and you sort of shifted this a little bit here, is that in recruitment mode, right? If you're a school or an organization, whatever it is, and you're recruiting volunteers or you're recruiting for students or whatever it is, you do have to do the rah, 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 we're awesome a little bit to get people can feel like I want to be part of awesome, right? And they have to feel like the school does have it together. And at the same time now, like you're bringing in this whole, like, we got to balance a little bit because we can't pay for all of it. And we need you to help us be awesome, right? And so that is different pages on the same website almost, but it's important to appreciate that those things are not the same thing. Yes. And that whole you versus me versus we thing is still something that I struggle with because it depends on the audience and where I'm speaking. And I have to sometimes catch myself to make sure that it's more of, homiletics and sermonics than it is anything else. So it's an appreciation of both things. I want to catch a couple of other questions. I know we're running a little bit late on time. So differentiate for me here in the space of words that win between different media that you're using your stories and your content in, between a fundraising ask in an email versus a social media post versus maybe even direct mail. Like, does it change? Should it change? Maybe it's not. Is it a different approach? Because you've talked to you about problem, solution, call to action as a frame for basically all the writing that you're doing, regardless really of the domain in which you're doing it. But I do think, or at least I've seen good organizations that are splitting between how they're doing it in different media. And so I want to ask you on that.
Well, let me throw it back to you. What have you seen? What sort of differences are you saying?
So sometimes I'll see, I feel like I'll see an organization that really harps inside the stories of the problems that their organization, and they just leave it. Like they're just talking about the problem. Maybe they're setting something up, as part of a media campaign, and they're just talking about the problem that exists in the world. And they want you to sort of harp in or mull over the extent of the problem that exists in the world, right? And their solutions, perhaps in many of those cases, are weak. So let's say you're talking about hate, right? So hate in the world. So you're an organization that deals with hate in the community, right? And so you want to maybe overplay and overproduce a message or a spot on the amount of hatred or the language of hate that goes on in the world. And you want people to be either shocked or moved or shaken by the extent of the problem. And then the solution is nothing more than simply just like you putting the name of your organization at the bottom without doing anything else. Sometimes it's highly effective. And so I'm curious if it changes between an email campaign, let's say that you're building, versus a social media campaign or a YouTube kind of a thing where you're trying to lay something out, and, does it change between media?
My knee-jerk reaction is that no, it doesn't change. I think the principles that I focus on, and we've spoken about two of them. There's two more that I at least want to list if we don't get something. But I don't think that they change based on the medium. I think your writing style is going to change. Certainly the length of the message is going to change. The space that you have to work with, the assets that you have. Can you put a picture? Can you put a video? Like, it matters whether it's a piece of paper or whether it's digital, whether it's face-to-face. So I think all of those, but in my mind, the most effective fundraising messages are always going to contain the problem. My guess, my educated opinion, I would say, is that a fundraising pitch that doesn't include at least something about what the solution is going to be will not fare as well as a fundraising message that does include it. So I'm a little, it depends when you said is effective. I was paying attention to your word choice there. It might be effective to draw someone to a website, right? Like if you're going to put a commercial on TV and it's going to be 30-second spot and it's going to show all of the hatred and prejudice that's out there, and then it's going to put the tag of the website, I think that could be effective at driving traffic to the website. I don't think that spot would be effective at driving donations.
Because it's ambiguous?
Because I appreciate what the problem is if the commercial does its job, but I don't appreciate what is going to change based on my donation. I don't appreciate what the impact is going to be, not on a specific level in terms of what will my donation actually fund, and not on a more like comprehensive levels. What's the ultimate impact going to eradicate hate or whatever the case may be. Like, I think that those are necessary ingredients in the cocktail.
I imagine that if the call to action isn't money, but it's volunteerism or an act of kindness, right? So that's not different either, right? It just has to be, if it's not there and it's not driving you to a website, it's just a shocking, evocative kind of piece. At the end, you're probably,
you're probably not sure what the next action is.
Right, what am I supposed to do here?
Right. So, and that is principle number 3 for me. So a problem, solution, call to action. I make it all about you. And the third one is that the writing has to be, in my mind, the piece of communication has to be simple and clear. Like, it has to be super clear what you want me to do as a donor. You want me to give, you want me to donate, you want me to click that button. Like, I like to be painfully clear, and my personal style isn't to be cute or kitschy or clever. Like, in my mind, from a fundraising standpoint, I think this is true in a marketing standpoint in general, although I think there's more allowances for it because it's just such a crowded marketplace out there. But when it comes to fundraising, I place a much higher premium on simplicity and clarity. Like, tell me what the problem is, tell me what the solution is, and tell me what you want me to do about it. Like, if it gets cute, if you make people think too much, donating is hard and illogical in a lot of ways, right? Like, we're just giving away money and we essentially get nothing in return. Like, don't make it more challenging than it already is. It's hard enough to raise money, right? So by making a message cute or clever or making me think too much about what you're trying to do, like, it's simply easier to not do anything as a donor. So I don't exert a ton of creativity in my writing when it comes to like coming up with this clever message. I actually view that as something that can damage the message. So it's another like interesting thing that comes out is sometimes organizations are looking for something that's like really eye-catching or like this amazing hashtag, amazing tagline for the campaign. And I'm not happy to brainstorm and be creative and land on something that is unique and effective and authentic to the organization. Like, all of those I'm totally game for. Just don't want it to be too clever.
Okay. Comment on this. It's always one call to action. You're never asking for two things in that, right?
That's a pretty basic marketing best practice.
I want to make sure that that's clear because sometimes you'll say that I've seen it and people will say, oh, let's ask them to be, let's say it was in the peer-to-peer space. Let's ask them to be an ambassador and make a donation.
No, but it's interesting though, because in learning more about the different ways that people can give from actually previous episodes of our podcast together, I saw a really interesting piece of research, which is that a little bit counterintuitive to me based on that rule. Like I was always very strict about having one call to action, even if that call to action is like click this button and donate. But one piece of research that I continue to see over and over and over again is that if you remind people that your organization is able to accept multiple payments, especially non-cash payments, donations go up. And what is super interesting about this is for two reasons. One is that this is a total tangent, but I just find this so fascinating. One is that non-cash gifts are much higher than cash gifts. So if you can give from your DAF or stocks or part of your retirement funds, that gift is almost by definition going to be larger than if I were going to give you cash. But the fascinating part about this is just reminding people that they have assets makes their cash gifts go up. In other words, if you gave a piece of communication and you A/B tested it, and one piece of communication just said, click on this button to donate, and the other piece of communication said, we accept, stocks and crypto and whatever, just so you know, like lots of people are choosing to give this way. If you'd like to give the old fashioned way, donate here. And you just looked at the A/B test of the results of the cash gifts that came from it, the cash gifts are going to be higher in the B test because people are reminded of their wealth, which is surprising to me. Just to bring it back, so it's not a total tangent. It was surprising to me because I do like only focusing on one call to action. And I think my intuition would have been if you tell people that they have all of this choice about how to give, it's going to give them some paralysis by analysis. But we see that cash gifts go up there.
Okay. Two last questions before we finish up. One, does it change between a $50 ask and a $50,000 ask?
$50,000 ask is going to, generally speaking, require more transactional information about the finances of the campaign, the finances of the organization. They're going to often, major donors are going to approach this from a more cerebral place than an emotional place. From what everything I've done, and again, you give that to them, right? Like you have to package it the right way, and you have to give it to them. But the act of giving is an emotional act. It's not a transaction. You want it to stay in the transformational side and not the transaction side. So without ducking any information, without skirting any numbers or any question that they ask, you always want to bring donors back to the emotional side of things. And I think that's the only difference between the small donor and the major donor is the major donors often think that their gift is what's the opposite of cerebral, but or maybe it is cerebral. It's a cerebral gift and not an emotional gift, but it's always an emotional gift. You're always going to raise more money by talking about the impact, by talking about how a life has been changed, than you are about dollars and cents. If you get people thinking analytically, if you get people doing math in their head, they're going to give less money than if you're able to stay on the emotional side. So when you're talking to major donors and giving them this more transactional type information, I would always recommend to fundraisers that they steer it back at the end of that conversation or at the end of that part of the conversation to the emotional side of things.
Okay, good. We're almost out of time just because I like to try to keep it to just about an hour. And we're not going to get into the whole piece of modern technology in dealing with the words that win, like the AI component of as competition for you, let's say, but we'll get there at some point. My last question would be today is if you're giving the leader advice, an organizational leader advice or fundraiser advice about it, what's the one piece of advice that you feel like today they can implement on to level up their writing and their storytelling or their messaging communications right now that they can tangibly see, not in dollars, but tangibly see the difference in the quality and level of it? Meaning, assuming they're not hiring somebody at the moment to come in and do their writing, they don't have someone on their team, they're a one-person shop, they're writing every piece of communication that they're doing for their organization, and it's hard, and they're struggling, they're not a writer, and they're struggling to get it. So give me like a tip or two pieces here that really can help a leader right now improve right now.
So everyone does this a little bit differently, but what I would tell people to do is record yourself, not in front of a computer, but like literally take your phone. I don't want you in front of a computer because I don't want you to be tempted to look at your website or your mission or your vision statement or your history. Just speak from the heart, from based on everything you know about your organization. Speak into your phone and describe why a person steps through the doors of your organization. Let's go through that exercise of why and think about a specific individual that walked through your doors recently. Keep it like super specific. Don't make a general statement about all people who walk through your doors. Think of someone specific and describe that person and the pain that that person was experiencing before they walk through your doors. And then do the same on the flip side of a success story of what that world looked like for that person after they receive your services, whether it was a one-time thing or whether they've been walking through your doors now for 3 years and they're a changed person, whatever, it's going to be different for every organization. But record yourself using your own words in describing that pain and then that relief or that alleviation of the pain at the end. And once you have that captured, you're going to be able to, you're going to have real words, real emotion that you're going to be able to use when you do your next fundraising pitch, whether again that's in person or whether you're sitting down to write something, but your words are going to be right there for you.
It'll be then interesting for them to compare what they said into the phone versus what they actually have on their website right now or the communications that they're using right now, and to see what's the same or what's different between those two, right?
Yeah, I don't know of any mission statement in the history of nonprofit organizations that was written by one person. So the fact that there's just one single individual, the person who's making the ask, using his or her own words and conveying that emotion, I think it's going to, of course, it's going to be different. And it's, I think, going to be much better, much more effective.
Amazing. What else? Did I leave anything out for today?
No, just if you're keeping score at home, the building blocks, I think I tried to spell out in some form or another.
Important. Sum it up for me. Yeah.
Where problem, solution, call to action. It's all about you. Make it all about you. The writing should be simple and clear and not so clever. And make it an emotional case for giving. Don't fall back on facts and figures and statistics. Keep it emotional.
Amazing. Okay. We will leave it there. Those of you who have been following us, liking us, sharing it, coming up with comments, please continue to do so. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, we're always interested in that. We haven't had it yet, but we'll get there. And if you have any ideas for future guests, which you haven't done that either, but also future concepts or ideas that we should discuss, topics that we should discuss, by all means, share those with us. He is Raimy Rubin. I am Bini Marilis. This is the Raimy and Bini podcast for today. Take care.